for this delay. Welcome to yet another episode of the season 2 of Asha Ganga Jamani online series. Well, you're used to seeing Professor Ali Nadeem Rezavi's face, but here today it's me because Professor Rezavi couldn't make it for some family reasons. Hope you're all making efforts to stay safe from the raging epidemic. I do not need to remind you what the country's best known voice tells you each time you make a phone call. But please do get your office staff, domestic helps, double doses of vaccinations, and also a booster if it's applicable to you. Do wear the mask and avoid crowded places. Well, today we're going to host Professor Mohammad Sajjad, who will talk to us about Sir Syed, his college, his colleagues, and the mission. In the recent past, many new works on the founder of Aligarh Muslim University have come out. One of the recent authors and works on Sir Syed was discussed in our series in November. Apart from Shafiq Idwai's book, published in English, we have had some other works. One crucially important work, which was recently published, is that of Dr. Iftikhar Alam, which details the relations which Sir Syed had with his contemporaries. A special analysis is made of Sir Syed's two well-known comrades, Mosirul Mulk and Viqarul Mulk, and their mutual conflicts and misgivings are also given space. But before we go on to ask Dr. Sajjad to speak on these works, let me introduce you to Dr. Mohammad Sajjad, who's a professor of modern Indian history at Aligarh Muslim University. And also, he's a very well-known face both in academia and social media. He's an author of 4 important books, which have been published by Routledge and Primus, and very frequent writer for important journals, magazines, and other portals. I love the fact that he has written on, and his dissertation, his works have been on Bihari identity, Bihari Muslims, and communalism, themes that are very close to my heart. And he's contributed about 30 research papers on these topics and many others. 4 of his papers are also in Hindi. Professor Sajjad has written a number of articles in Urdu as well. And he, I believe, is an expert in Urdu. Apart from this, he's a member of the Public Relations Committee of AMU. Let me share that Professor Sajjad is very popular and much appreciated by his students. So what is he going to talk about today? He's going to be talking about different worldviews that were shared by Sir Syed's companions. And because of these differing worldviews subscribed by his companions, there were factional disagreements and arguments between Sir Syed and his comrades. And there were also disagreements between the companions, among the companions as well. And today's talk, we will be uncovering how all these conflicts that were at play during the Aligarh movement were used by the colonial state. We will also learn about how the impact of these differing views made an overall impact on the Muslims, in particular their response to the colonial state. So the story will tell us about how Aligarh movement actually had many layers and stratifications within itself, and there was no smooth solidarity that we have been made to believe so far. So I want to welcome Professor Mohammad Sajjad on board. Good evening, sir.
Very good evening. Thank you.
So, sir, before we sort of talk about, and before you begin your lecture, I just want to ask you one question. How did your interest in Sir Syed grow?
In fact, no student of modern Indian history can afford ignoring this topic, because 19th century is the century for India, when colonialism was deepening itself, and anti-colonial resistance was also emerging, and it was going ups and downs. In order to confront the colonial state, or even to negotiate with the colonial modernity, a certain kind of cultural self-confidence was required, and therefore from the early decades of 19th century, reformists started emerging. You may or may not call it Renaissance, or there would be a debate valid debates as to whether it should be called Renaissance or not. But these kinds of socio-religious reform movements were on. It was through these movements that the people gathered cultural self-confidence and intellectual and other resources with which they negotiated with the colonial modernity, and they moved ahead. So without looking into it, one cannot understand modern India. And in that phenomenon of Indians' negotiation with the colonial modernity, the Muslim segment responded in various ways. In among these so many ways, Sir Syed led Aligarh movement is an outstanding one for many reasons, because it went on to have many kinds of implications long after Sir Syed left this world. That is one thing. Second thing, one of the most enduring legacies of Sir Syed is that the college he founded grew up into a huge residential university, and which endures till date, and it contributes in various ways in nation making, and it also keeps quoting controversies on various counts, so it always remains in news. So all these things together make it quite interesting for everybody who is interested in understanding modern and contemporary India and its Muslim segment.
Yes, that's
So
correct.
this is
And
how.
even non-Muslims for that matter, particularly in the recent
Yes, yes, yes,
past. Yes, sir.
of course.
So shall we begin with our talk?
Sure, sure, sure.
Really
So,
looking forward to this.
uh, Dr. Shagufta Siddhi and one of our colleagues here is for some reasons has not been able to make it here, Professor Nadeem Rizavi, and other learned audience or viewers, whatever we may call. It's a it's a matter of great privilege and honor for me to have been invited to speak from this platform of Asha Ganga Jamuni season 2. From this huge platform, most of the time only much accomplished scholars have spoken. This way, the host, by virtue of having asked a non-entity like me to speak, has chosen to earn much disrepute for the platform. The speaker, however, doesn't run any such risk for the simple fact that he hardly has got any such accomplishment to his credit. This lack of reputation would be rather evident here in this talk as well. For the talk is simply an articulation of other scholars, more specifically of Professor Iftikhar Alam Khan, who has churned out many significant works on Sir Syed studies. All of these works in Urdu, deep in historiographic rigors and lucid in articulation. One hopes soon, at least, some of his more significant works would be rendered into English. I'm told at least one such important work is already being rendered into English. It is underway. In that case, those not knowing Urdu script will not have to bear with an unworthy mediator like me. The choice of the specific sub-theme on the subject is with a definite purpose. It is not just for the sake of convenience of the speaker. Otherwise, as confessed a while ago, this speaker is barely competent to speak on the ambitious and contentious sub-theme that has been chosen to be spoken on today. Rather, factional fights to control the management of the MAO College, Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, in the last decade of the life of the founder, that is Syed Ahmad, who became better known as Sir Syed, is a story which tells a lot about colonial power play in the late 19th century, as well as the way the colonized communities engaged with the colonial state and also with the unfolding shades and conceptions of nationhood. In the words of David Lelyveld, who is the most formidable name so far as the researches on the subject on this specific subject is concerned, he said, I quote, "What Syed Ahmad did not anticipate when he founded the college at Aligarh was the notion of India as a nation state. This otherwise important issue, however, is not of our direct concern today. That question would acquire greater salience only in 20th century after Sir Syed passed away in early 1898, to be precise, in March 1898. Despite a so-called quote-unquote solidarity of the Muslim communities of a particular class and region, about this specific class of this specific region, David Lelyveld uses a particular expression, kacheri milieu. So in the college at Aligarh, there has always been multiple strands even within the college. This is an aspect which has not been emphasized as much or popularized as much, even though in academic studies, rigorous academic studies, this has been brought out well, but it has not been popularized as much. So those strands did not represent only personality clashes. These apparently speaking, these personality clashes also represented ideological clashes, as you would see, such as sorry, whom to educate, what curriculum to offer, who should control the college management, what should be the ways of engaging with other segments of the society, how to look upon the policies of the colonial state, etc. So these were the kinds of issues around which differences were there among the college managers. Though these appeared more as personality clashes. Thus, notwithstanding the limitations of the historiographies, which find factionalism as a convenient tool of analysis among the elites of colonially subjugated people, we choose to look into the subject along the lines of cleavages which existed in the college, particularly during the later decade of the founder's life, which had its own implications subsequently. So the story of factional fight that we are going to discuss today is also a story of one who will represent a section of influential Muslims in society and before the state as well. Two, how will the relevant segment of the community respond to the colonial modernity? Whether they will acquire modern education even while retaining their self-perceived identity, or they will revert back to the traditional education system. Three, how will the elements of colonial masters induce or preempt certain tendencies among the leaders of the college and the COM? This expression COM will become a debatable kind of expression, to which we will revert back. Four, did the leadership of the college and the COM harbor only an unqualified loyalism to the British rule, or did it also have quite discernible assertions against racism, against colonial ravages of India's agrarian economy, against cultural hegemony of the West, and so on and so forth? So these are the things we are going to find out. Fortunately, in at least 4 of the latest Urdu monographs of Professor Iftikhar Alam Khan, we do find lots of new things emerging. This huge chunk of crucial writings of Sir Syed remained largely neglected by the scholars, despite the fact that parts of Sir Syed's writings have been rendered into English in recent decades, mainly by Professor Shan Mohammad. The scholars such as Professor Iftikhar and Professor Shafiq Ilwai are bringing out such writings of Sir Syed for our benefit. In the first decade of 20th century, an alumnus, Aftab Ahmed Khan or Sahibzada Aftab Ahmed Khan, would protest against Morrison's, who was the principal of the college, attempt in 1904 at what he called converting the college into a traditional madrasa by introducing postgraduate courses in Arabic by the then principal. He would finally succeed in exiting the principal, Theodore Morrison, by the year 1909. Subsequently, more of factional fights will manifest around several issues related to college, related to many colonial policies, colonial state policies. So we are, however, concerned more with the story of factional clashes in the last decade of 19th century. Professor Iftikhar Alam Khan's intimate biography of Sir Syed, which was published in 2006, and its another edition has come out sometimes back. In that intimate biography of Sir Syed, which has an Urdu title, Sir Syed Darune Khana, has got its last 2 chapters on that aspect of factional fights in the last decades of the founder's life. He recently developed these last 2 chapters into a separate monograph, a separate exclusive monograph with the title Rafaqae Sir Syed, Rafaqat, Raqabat wa Iqtadar ki Kashmakash. So this title itself is quite suggestive about the factional fights within the major companions of Sir Syed. One of the important sources for this kind of story is an Urdu book written by somebody related to college, and incidentally, his name is also Iftikhar. So his Syed Iftikhar Alam Marherwi. In the year 1901, he wrote an account, and he gives all these descriptions in interesting ways. So one of the important sources is this, and there are many other sources, diaries and accounts by many other companions of Sir Syed, and there are many writings, particularly in the periodicals which were edited by Sir Syed, Aligarh Institute Gazette and Tehzeeb al-Akhlaq, or alternatively known as the Mohammedan Social Reformer. So based on all those accounts and writings, this story has been constructed. One may ask an obvious question. What was there in a college management which had so much of stakes and factional fights, and which would deserve attention of historians? Did it really have an important bearing on the history of South Asia? The answer is yes. The affirmative answer is offered to us by the extraordinarily well-researched book of David Lelyveld, published in 1978. Before I quote a pertinent paragraph from his book, let us take a note of the subtitle of the book. The title of the book is Aligarh's First Generation. The subtitle of the book is Muslim Solidarity in British India. So was there a solidarity, or were there many stratifications? This is what we are going to discuss today. Now, the question that I raised here, that was it historically so important that the factional fight within a college management will invite our attention? He says, Lelyveld says, this quest of Muslim elites, mostly from Western UP, to create a Muslim solidarity will go a long way in the decades to come. This quest attained stridency after the death of Sir Syed in 1898, so much so that most of the successors of Sir Syed dropped the agenda of education to the last of the priorities of the educational conference and turned this into a political body. Another residential college was not opened, not even in the Muslim concentration cities of Lahore and Dhaka. Even the campaign to upgrade the college into a university during 1898 to 1920 there was an attempt at creating an all-India political constituency of Muslims, as said by Gelmino and David Lelyville in their 1974 essay. The point being raised here is even that campaign of the Mohammedan Educational Conference, which was founded by Sir Syed in 1886. So this Mohammedan Educational Conference had only two things to its credit: that the MAO college was later developed into a university called Aligarh Muslim University as we know it today. And another significant addition was in 1906, a wing of women's education was started, later developed into a big women's college affiliated to the university, MU. Apart from these two things, it could not do anything. As I said, that even in a Muslim concentration city like Lahore or in Dhaka, this Mohammedan Educational Conference could not create another residential college of modern education after Sir Syed. The Mohammedan Educational Conference functioned from 1886 to 1945. So in these 6 decades of its existence, it could not replicate itself in other cities. So what does Lelyville say so far as the significance of our attention to this small affair, quote unquote, a small affair of the college management is concerned? Lelyville says, ever since Syed Ahmad started his movement to found a special educational establishment for Indian Muslims, Aligarh has summoned up in both friend and foe an image of Muslim participation as Muslims in India's new political institutions. A large part of Aligarh's significance, its meaning, lies in this image and in the imagination of those who created it, quite aside from any assessment of how influential they were in the society at large. But even such a cultural account must go beyond the realm of pure ideas into an examination of social experience, the experience of Aligarh's founders and first students. For example, in order to understand how being Muslim could be so salient as a political identity, unquote. Thus, what we see that what was happening to the college project had its political implications on a larger scale across the subcontinent. This is why it is significant to identify the layers within the contest for grabbing the college management. So Professor Iftikhar Alam's monograph, Urdu monograph, underlines various shades and trends in the Aligarh movement. In his prefatory note itself, he says that there were people of various ideological shades with Sir Syed in his mission. We are concerned particularly with the last decade of the life of the founder, that is 1888 to 1898, largely. So one such close companion of Sir Syed was Maulvi Samiullah, who lived between 1834 to 1908. He was more self-opinionated and traditionalist in his outlook and in his idea of education for his countrymen. And as we will see later, that this fellow used the resident students. He incited some of such disgruntled students in order to mount pressure on the management and to get hold of the management. So Samiullah, the conduct of Samiullah from many of the episodes will emerge as to he was rather an obstacle or impediment in the way of Sir Syed than a companion. Then the question arises as to why did Sir Syed take him along or kept him along. We will be discussing it. Sir Syed had a different kind of leadership quality. He always believed in taking people along and making best use of the potential that was hidden in a person. So Maulvi Samiullah had a different outlook of education for people. Another important fellow was Mehdi Ali, more famous as Mohsinul Mulk, the title he got from the Nizam of Hyderabad when he was working there. He was much more worldly wise, a pragmatic, a cunning person, and knew how to self-perpetuate himself. And after Sir Syed passed away, he did his best to marginalize Sir Syed's son and successor Syed Mahmud, and he wanted to become an all India political leader through the vehicle of this Mohammedan Educational Conference and Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College. The third important person or companion was Mushtaq, Maulvi Mushtaq, better known as Viqarul Mulk. He too was in the services of Nizam, where he got this title Viqarul Mulk. He lived from 1841 to 1917. So he was a more devout Muslim and upright, but also a traditionalist rather than a modernist. And despite being so very conservative in many of his ideas, he was a very tall humanist, as we will see in this discussion. He too has a very, one can say by today's standard, a very reactionary views about education. For example, he wanted only a barely literate farmers, literate smiths, iron smiths or carpenters, and these kinds of people. He did not want a better education for all these professional classes. So this way, he in a way tried to perpetuate the professional castes or subordinated castes in their place. So this was quite a reactionary view. Another companion of Sir Syed was Raja Shiv Prasad, also known as Sitara-e-Hind, with whom he will have huge differences on Urdu-Hindi question. And who will become, that is Raja Shiv Prasad will come closer to a colonial official, Kempson, who was director of public instruction of United Provinces. And Sir Syed has a serious conflict with this director of public instruction, Kempson. Director of public instruction in those days, in late 19th century, was equivalent to today's education minister. So these were the problems. There was another aristocrat, Raja Jaikishan Das of Muradabad. He was a professional lawyer, and there were few other people along with Sir Syed. Maulvi Zakaullah, who was a westernized intellectual. Colonel Graham, he was a Western representing liberal values. So these many kinds of people were there associated with Sir Syed in his Aligarh movement. So in this whole story of these dramatis personae, let us also remember an overall historical context that Sir Syed's son Syed Mahmud was increasingly becoming aggressive against British racism. He had resigned from the High Court as judge, High Court Allahabad as judge, protesting against racial treatments meted out to him. This is demonstrated in great detail by a scholar, Ellen M. Guender, in his PhD thesis of 2004, awarded from the McGill University, Canada. We will be using this work also in this talk. Sorry. So far as the issue of racism or protest against colonial racism is concerned, it is a lesser known fact that Sir Syed also quite frequently kept on protesting against racial practices, instances of racial practices of many high officials of European officials of British Indian administration. And such evidence from writings, very assertive and very unambiguous writings of Sir Syed, what impression do we gather that otherwise Sir Syed is popularized as having been quite a loyal to the British Raj. So that truth, that is one shade of truth. There is another shade of truth that there are lots of writings of Sir Syed in his periodical, in other periodicals as well, in his speeches as well, where he spoke very unambiguously and very assertively, very sharply against instances of racial practices, particularly in the decades of 1870s. This was also a decade when he wanted a favor from the colonial state in order to establish and promote his college. So notwithstanding that kind of necessity or pragmatism, we do find many instances, not isolated instances, many instances wherein he spoke and wrote against colonial racism. Combined with this, let us also take note of the fact that more Mahmud turned anti-British, the more he was getting marginalized from the affairs of the MAO college in Aligarh. Though Iftikhar Sahab has not insisted much on this coincidence or aspect, but this comes out very clearly that Syed Mahmud's marginalization by the companions of Sir Syed within the college management and Syed Mahmud's assertion or conflict with the British colonial administration were coinciding. There were continuous personality clash between Sir Syed and Samiullah, but this came to a head once Sir Syed wanted his vision of residential college of modern education to be carried forward by his son, and therefore he wanted to appoint Mahmud as the joint secretary of the college. That was in the year 1889. And prior to that, so far as relevant amendment in the regulations of the Board of Trustees was concerned, a lot of conflicts were going on. This came to a head in 1889. And in a run-up to the exercise, as I said, in 1886, Samiullah had engineered some student unrest to sabotage Sir Syed's move. He charged Sir Syed of perpetuating nepotism. Why Sir Syed preferred his son to be successor in the Board of Trustees is because ever since their stay in London, in England rather, the whole scheme of college and the college to be upgraded as university, modeled on Cambridge and other such institutions of England, it was Syed Mahmud who clearly subscribed to the worldview of Sir Syed so far as modern education was concerned. Otherwise, as we just discussed, that every other comrade of Sir Syed had very different view. So that was the reason why Sir Syed wanted Syed Mahmud to be the leader within the college management. In fact, Maulvi Samiullah got support of many landed elites, mainly of Aligarh district, Bulandshahr and Muradabad, against Sir Syed. This was more an opposition to Sir Syed's project of modern education and less a personality clash, in the sense that, as we just discussed, that Maulvi Samiullah was more for traditional kind of education, a traditional madrasa kind of education rather than for the Western modern education. So Sir Syed had to face a lot of odds to get amendments to the trustee bill passed in December 1889 with 50 votes for and 27, as many as 27 votes against the proposal. Interestingly, in this factional fight, the European principal of the college, Mr. Bey, extended his support to Samiullah, Maulvi Samiullah. So he was on the side of the traditionalists rather than on the side of the modernists. This factional fight was basically a fight between those who harbored suspicion against Sayyad's vision of modern education, but were not brave enough to oppose it as strongly as they wanted to do, because by the decade of 1880s, Sir Syed had become quite stronger so far as his influences and his influences on and accessibility to the British colonial administrators was concerned. Even though the opposition against Sir Syed had irritated him to the extent that, otherwise so careful in writing, Sir Syed referred to his supporting faction as lion and his opponent faction as jackals, शेर और गीदड़ से उन्होंने ये किया, हवाला दिया, मुआजना किया अपने हामियों का और अपने मुखालिफिन का. Overall, Sir Syed had identified 7 types of opponents. Of these 7 types, the last ones were those who were, in his view, nadan, innocents, and there were other people whom he identified as perpetually jealous people. So there were, as I said, 7 types of opponents identified by Sir Syed. Given the influence of Sir Syed, his opponents often propagated various kinds of rumors against Sir Syed, so that larger community elites may turn against him. Most handy was his religious and cultural views. One such pretext was a rumor that Sir Syed did not care much for the weaker sections, so far as imparting modern education was concerned. Whereas much earlier than that, Sir Syed had already advocated that in the public schools, the domiciliary type of education should be avoided, which was the practice during those days among the elites, and all should come to the public school and should sit together to receive education regardless of their class locations. And he also offered a parallel. He asked a question as to, when you can travel in rail with every class of people in rail bogies, why can't your children sit together to receive modern education? So this was there. Within the college also, by 1888-89, the grading of the residential facility and dining facility had been brought to a near end. So that stratification was coming to an end by 1888-89. Even then, these kinds of rumors were there. These kinds of backbiting against Sir Syed was there. And therefore, the truth about the grading in fooding and lodging, in dining and lodging in the college hostel, is a slightly complicated rather than a straight one, and the truth is quite different from what has thus far been popularized. In principle, Sir Syed was not in favor of differential lodging and dining for weaker sections. He was rather for endowments, for scholarships, for stipends, so far as imparting education to the weaker sections was concerned, so that the students coming from the weaker sections should not have a loss of morale or self-confidence, or self-respect should not be hurt. And therefore, he himself was against this stratified lodging and dining. Around the same time, Sir Syed was writing and making certain kinds of interventions inside the council also. And therefore, here I would draw a specific attention of our viewers and audience that, contrary to a popularization that Sir Syed was always apparently obsessed with identitarian issues, that is not precisely the case. There are so many writings of Sir Syed and his interventions inside the Legislative Council when he became member of the Viceroy's Executive Council, or Imperial Legislative Council, or UP Council, United Provinces Council. What comes out of his many writings and his interventions in the council that agriculture, education, and health, these three issues were of foremost concern of Sir Syed. He submitted a memorandum on in June 1883, insisting on the government to establish agricultural development banks in rural areas. In this memorandum, he also expounded upon the rural indebtedness at the hands of the oppressive money lenders, Mahajans, as he told. Sir Syed underscored that these proposed banks would be the only way to rescue the rural poor from the Mahajans and Sahukars. In the capacity of member of the Viceroy's Council during 1878 and 1880, he had drafted and proposed a bill in September 1879. Another such elaborate bill drafted and introduced by Sir Syed was on compulsory vaccination for pox, which was in September 1879 as well as in July 1880. All these issues have been brought out by Professor Iftikhar Alam Khan in great detail in yet another monograph of him, which exclusively concerns with his agrarian interventions, Sir Syed's agrarian interventions. So Sir Syed demanded amendments in the existing farm laws to help out the farmers by reducing the revenue extraction, to list the causes of famines, and to ways to prevent or minimize them. He also asked the government to provide irrigation facilities. So what we see that with these kinds of interventions and with these kinds of widening of his concerns, he was becoming more important public figure than he may be supposed to be by the students of history. We also know that Sir Syed was the first Indian to have bravely written in his tract Causes of the Indian Revolt, Asbab Bagawat-e-Hind, that the agrarian exploitation and framing many of them in false cases was at the root of the people's discontent, leading to the rebellion of 1857, or leading to the people's violence against the Company Raj. So this is there. Sir Syed's memorandum in 1883 has already been mentioned. He also demanded that agricultural soft loans to the agriculturalists should be extended. The state should provide irrigation facilities by making canals out of rivers, and in those regions where rivers are not there, wells should be dug. And he also specifies in what kind of regions wells should be walled with pakki eente, that is the baked bricks, and with the kachi eente, that is the unbaked bricks. So he is speaking on these many things, and he is not only writing and speaking, he is making interventions through his memorandum, through his debates inside the council, by presenting draft bills inside the council, and he's emphasizing on ilm, that is knowledge, irfat wasana, craft and industry, and zaraat, that is agriculture. So agriculture, health, and education is at the center of his discussion, as well as in his words as well as in his actions. And since long he had been persuading and asking the government to do the needful in this regard. There are so many editorials and articles by him. I will just read out some of the titles of some of the articles. Dehat ki safai, conservancy of villages. Hamare rausa aur qaumi bhalai. There are many on environment, on railways, and the colonial ravages of agrarian and other economy, on the deindustrialization or the decline of craft, more correctly to say. So on these many things he kept writing, speaking, and intervening. So Sir Syed, in order to strengthen his arguments in support of such demands, also quoted relevant extracts from the Cunningham's famine report of 1881, how colonial state had ravaged the rural economy. So these were his interventions through which he had enhanced his stature among the people as well as in the eyes of the government. And because of that enhanced stature, he was able to manage the factional fights within the college also, and he was also able to extract favors for his college. Otherwise, he did face many impediments from the high colonial officials. So what happened after Sir Syed, that his son Syed Mahmud was marginalized from the college management, and since Syed Mahmud had already fights with the colonial regime, so most probably, even though we don't have very direct evidence to that effect, but the whole context suggests, that is, the study of the sources can lead us to make an intelligent guess that Syed Mahmud's fight with the colonial state authorities also helped in getting him marginalized from the college management, and these people eventually got hold of the college management. And this is that could have been most important reason why the Modern Educational Conference did not do what it should have done. It could not do adequately. As I told, that it only did two things. It upgraded the college into a university, and it added a women's college wing to itself. Otherwise, it could not spread across India, because Modern Educational Conference was set up to enlist support from across India, and people from Bengal particularly had an objection that why should they support the campaign to upgrade the college into a university if this was not going to expand elsewhere from Aligarh. So they were told that no, you extend your support. This university will have affiliating jurisdiction across India. Finally, in 1920, when it eventually became university, it was not given the right to affiliate colleges across India. So that way, those people were kind of ditched. They felt a bit ditched as to the expectation with which they had extended their support, though those expectations could not be fulfilled. And around this issue also, there was a fight between the factions, particularly Sahibzada Aftab and the Ali brothers. Ali brothers were adamant that no, we must get all India affiliating jurisdiction. Sahibzada Aftab became pragmatic. He told that whatever we are getting, we should get it. Otherwise, we may lose this also. BHU had already become a university in 1916. So these were the things. But the companions of Sir Syed, particularly Mohsinul Mulk, he prioritized politics through educational conference rather than concentrating on expanding education, particularly residential colleges of modern education. So that was perhaps one of the problems and one of the conflicting visions and programs and commitment and conviction so far as the program of modern education through this Aligarh vehicle of Aligarh movement was concerned. These conflicting views also reflected with the turn of the 20th century as well, that with the turn of the 20th century, this essential loyalism of Aligarh started giving way to direct confrontation with the colonial state. And therefore, in the first decade of the 20th century, there were many confrontations of the students with the colonial regime, and they increasingly started joining the national movement, which was emerging and which was about to acquire mass phase. And these existence of many kinds of ideological and political trends within the campus continued till the end of the colonial era, even though during the last phases of colonial era, the separatist trend was stronger than the other trends, about which Kumar Mohammad Ashraf has written a long two-part Urdu essay. I don't know whether this has been rendered into English or not. So we are perhaps running short of time. Otherwise, I could have shared those details as well. Let me quickly conclude it. And before I conclude, I will be again referring to Lelyveld, who says, before I would conclude, I would like to draw attention to two important points. One is taken from Lelyveld and another from Kumar Mohammad Ashraf, the left revolutionary historian and noted freedom fighter. Lelyveld says that not all Muslim separatism was Aligarh's doing. Much of it was a response to how the British government defined political constituencies in India. A good deal was defense against anti-Muslim actions on the part of various political and religious groups. Even among Muslims, there was many important sources of leadership outside Aligarh. Nevertheless, Aligarh was frequently the focus of efforts to formulate a new Muslim political consciousness, unquote. So with greater clarity and elaboration, this aspect is asserted by Kumar Mohammad Ashraf in his two-part long Urdu essays published in the 1950s on how various competing political trends emerged and flourished within MU with the turn of the century. There were anti-British mobilizations in the first decade of 20th century, as I told, led by the nationalists such as Dr. Syed Mahmud, Hasrat Mohani, Syed Hussain, Vilayat Ali Bambuk, Abdul Rahman Bijnori, Syed Muhammad Tonki, etc. in late colonial era too. Only the Muslim League was not there. There were leftist and nationalist socialist trends, and they were not less visible. This trend was visible in post-independence era too, particularly in the 60s. Rajkumar Trivedi's critical book, Critical Triangle, and Mushirul Hassan's two long essays published in Indian Economic and Social History Review, ISHR of 1985, and in the India International Center Quarterly 2003, and Majid Siddiqui's essay published in ISHR in 1987. These long academic essays provide us with great details about the various kinds of nationalist trends and socialist trends which were existing among the campus people. So far as our specific focus on the last decade of 19th century is concerned, and Sir Syed is often brought into contention whether about his opposition to the Congress. On that count, we can only say that there were many models of democracy. Sir Syed was opposed to that specific model of democracy, and there can be academic debates on those things, but Sir Syed's opposition to the Congress has brought many contentions. Sir Syed had exchanges of letters with Badruddin Tayyabji in 1887 and 1888, and with which his position about the Congress comes out. So far as the views of his son Syed Mahmud is concerned, let me quote from Ellen Guenther's PhD thesis, unpublished PhD thesis. I quote from him: he, that is Syed Mahmud, never joined the Congress, but at the same time kept himself equally aloof from the anti-Congress propaganda carried on for some years by his father. Being a man of liberal education and true culture, he did not share the narrow exclusiveness of the average Indian Muslim, and his views on most of the controversial questions were characterized by a rare Catholicity, that is liberal. His acceptance among the Hindus generally was demonstrated by the fact that They tried to send him as their representative to the Imperial Legislative Council, though he never received that appointment. Unquote. So this quote from Ellen Guenther uh, throws a new light on the received wisdom or about the founder of the Aligarh College. Overall, in conclusion, we can say that the Aligarh reformist was neither a revolutionary, as said by Mushirul Hasan in his 1998 essay in EPW, nor did he live in revolutionary times. He had his limitations on a number of questions, including caste and gender. His constraints were not only the British, the Congress, the theologians were also his constraints. His constraints, we learned from Professor Iftikhar Alam's researches, were also his own close colleagues within the college, so far as the project of modern education was concerned. These dissenting colleagues played greater role in founding the Muslim League just 8 years after the death of Sir Syed. Historians need to look upon these developments in 20th century in correlation with what went on within the college in last decade of the lives of the founder and his son. In short, relying on received and essential wisdom without taking into account so many shades, howsoever contradictory, need to be questioned not only in academic domain, but also in the popular domain, the domain of public history. So far as studies on Sir Syed and his college are concerned, craft of history is much more serious business than many would usually believe it to be. So, in conclusion, we can say that this serious business of history writing and popularizing historical aspects should not be left to the non-professional historians. Otherwise, we will suffer from the kind of baseless propaganda that is often propagated against many of the historical personalities. So this is where I would like to end. There are many interesting anecdotes to explain our subjects, which I skipped, seeing the constraint of time. Otherwise, one interesting anecdote, not only interesting, but also very important, let me share with the viewers here, that Syed Mahmud was marginalized. Not only marginalized, he was virtually thrown out of his college. And he had to migrate out of Aligarh. He spent his last days in Sitapur with his cousin, and he died there itself in 1903. What happened that one of the important colleagues of Sir Syed, that is Mohsinul Mulk, through him, from three ways, there is a propaganda against Syed Mahmud that he was so negligent of his father, that Father Sir Syed, that the last rites of Sir Syed had to be performed with the money given by Mohsinul Mulk. This is a very, very unfortunate aspect of the story, because this is clearly a falsehood. Because Mohsinul Mulk claims that he gave away 50 rupees for that purpose. In those days, that is in 1898, not more than 2 rupees was required to perform all the rituals of last rites. And therefore, it is absolutely unbelievable. Another thing is, Professor Iftikhar Alam Khan has got hold of a very important document which suggests, which testifies, not suggests, that Syed Mahmud paid rupees 150 for to the doctor who was attending Sir Syed in Aligarh. So if somebody is paying this much for his father's treatment, would he refrain from performing the last rite? So in this narration of anecdote, I may not be able to articulate it as persuasively, but Professor Iftikhar Alam Khan in his monograph has made it very clear. There is another blog by a scholar based in Pakistan. He too wrote a blog against refuting this theory. Interestingly, each source that we see of this falsehood emanates from Mohsinul Mulk itself. So these are the flip sides of his colleague, Sir Syed's colleagues. So this we have to take all these into account, and how the colonial state were often seen on the side of the traditionalists rather than on the side of those who were standing for a modern Western education for the Indians at large.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. In fact, some of the anecdotes that you may have missed out on, हम लोगों के सवाल और आप उनके जब जवाब देंगे शायद उसमें उभर के आए. तो सर, आपने थोड़ा तो you shed light on how the relationship of Sir Syed and Badruddin Tayyab ji, but also, Professor Ali Haider would like to know about what was his relationship with the Deobandis. And was he aware? Certainly, he was aware of Raja Ram Mohan Roy's work and and the Bengal Renaissance.
These are better known aspects. Therefore, I prefer to skip this thing. He was quite aware of Raja Ram Mohan Roy as well, and he was aware of what was why Bengali Bhadrlok had gone ahead in modern education. In fact, he made some harsh speeches as well, so far as the advancement of Bengali Bhadrlok was concerned. So far as Deoband is concerned, of course, there was a direct conflict on the kind of vision of education Sir Syed had. There is a research paper by Brennan D. Ingram, who makes a comparison between Sir Syed and Ashraf Ali Thanvi. Ashraf Ali Thanvi was quite junior to Sir Syed, but he has made a comparison. He or she, I'm unaware of the gender of the author, Brennan D. Ingram. There were clear differences in approach, not only on education, but also on many other views. In fact, Sir Syed had to drop his religious reformism only because of pragmatism rather than because of his ideological conviction. If he would have gone ahead with religious reformism, his college project may have crumbled. He may not have got as much of support for his college, the financial support and other kinds of support. I mentioned one of the accounts, earliest accounts published in 1901 by Syed Iftikhar Alam Marherwi. In that book, Mohammedan College History is the title of the Urdu book. So in that account, there is an anecdote that so were the misgivings against Sir Syed, so widespread and so deep, that somebody took the trouble from Delhi to come to Aligarh only to see कि भाई सर सैयद जो हॉस्टल में लड़कों को रखे हुए हैं उन्हें ईसाई बना रहे हैं या मुस्लिम रहने दे रहे हैं. अब वो आए और दिन भर कॉलेज में घूमे, तब वो जाकर रिपोर्ट बताते हैं कि देखिए भाई ऐसा है कि लड़के ना तो बदतमीज हैं, ना बदतहजीब हैं, ना उन्होंने अपनी तहजीबी जड़ें छोड़ी हैं, और वो ठीक है जदीद तालीम ले रहे हैं लेकिन वो बहुत अच्छे से मिलते हैं, मेहमान नवाजी भी करते हैं, नमाज भी पढ़ते हैं, और ये सारी चीजें उन्होंने, तो ये प्रेशर था उनके ऊपर, सर सैयद के ऊपर, कि अगर वो रिलीजियस वो ये प्रोपेगेंडा, इवन समीउल्लाह वगैरह भी उनके साथ थे, लेकिन जब जरूरत पड़ती थी तो इसी तरह के र्यूमर्स वगैरह वो उड़ाने लगते थे, स्प्रेड करने लगते थे कि देखो ये जो है रिवायती तालीम नहीं दे रहा, ये मजहबी तालीम नहीं दे रहा, ये नेचरी बना देगा, ये क्रिस्टान बना देगा, इस तरह की बहुत सारी बातें थी. तो वो इन तमाम चीजों को बहुत प्रैग्मेटिकली वो हैंडल कर रहे थे. जब वो वीकर सेक्शन के लिए कुछ करते हुए नहीं दिखते थे तो कहते थे देखो ये एंटी वीकर सेक्शन है. जब वो वीकर सेक्शन के लिए कुछ कर रहे होते थे, स्टाइपेंड इंडाउमेंट का इंतजाम कर रहे थे, तो उनके क्लोजेस्ट कलीग्स ये कहते थे कि देखो ये क्या क्या कर रहा है, ये जो है किस तरह से थ्रेटन कर रहा है. यानी वो इधर वे उनके खिलाफ बार बार, कभी खाने के बहाने या किसी बहाने स्टूडेंट को का अनरेस्ट इंजीनियर किया जा रहा था. जो एंटी सोशल टाइप स्टूडेंट थे, थोड़ा मिसगाइडेड डिविएंट काइंड ऑफ स्टूडेंट थे, उनको अगर सस्पेंड कर दिया या वार्निंग इशू कर दी तो फिर उसका मिसयूज किया जाता था। ये तमाम चीजों को वो मैनेज कर रहे थे। तो ही वाज वर्किंग अगेंस्ट सो मेनी ऑड्स। जो अर्ली सोर्सेज और अकाउंट्स को, यानी विलायत हुसैन ने, उन्होंने अपनी आप बीती लिखी है जो बेसिकली अर्ली हिस्ट्री ऑफ द कॉलेज है, या ये मॉडर्न कॉलेज हिस्ट्री है, अगर और कुछ नहीं भी पढ़ा जाए, सिर्फ इन अकाउंट्स को भी पढ़ा जाए, तो ये बातें बहुत साफ वाजे हो जाती हैं कि क्या चल रहा था और वो कितने प्रेशर में ये सब काम कर रहे थे।
सर बहुत क्वेश्चंस हैं, इनफैक्ट हम लोगों को शायद कुछ क्वेश्चन स्किप करने पड़ेंगे। बहरहाल क्वेश्चन है मिर्जा हसनैन जी का, और वो पूछते हैं कि वर नवाब मोहसिन उल मुल्क एंड नवाब वकार उल मुल्क द सिंसियर सर्वेंट्स एंड सक्सेसर्स ऑफ द अलीगढ़ मूवमेंट आफ्टर सर सैयद्स डेथ। आपने इसका जिक्र किया हुआ है पहले अभी।
हाँ, यही
were all of
जी
them
जी जी
were all who were inclined towards the movement rationalists? Did Ahmadis and Ismailis? I think this is a question that might be interesting. Were Ahmadis and Ismailis that follow Aga
हाँ
Khan
हाँ,
also supported it?
this is a very good question, which will fill in the gap that I left in the presentation. As I told you that with the death of Sir Syed, there were many other kinds of sections who got associated with the Mohammedan Educational Conference and movement. The Ajmer faction, the Fulwari Sharif from Bihar, that faction, they associated with this project only after the death of Sir Syed. Otherwise, so long as Sir Syed was alive, they did not want to collaborate. So many kinds of things were there. So far as Ahmadiyas are concerned, I have come across some of the editorials, one or two editorials by Sir Syed, in which he is trying to engage with them. But as I told you that Sir Syed, out of his pragmatism, in order to obtain fund for the college, he largely avoided getting into these kinds of contentions. So far as the degree of sincerity of Mohsinul Mulk, Waqarul Mulk, etc. is concerned, Sir Syed's own editorials are good evidence to that effect. You see, what Sir Syed told at one point of time, that now a significant section of Muslims stand persuaded that they do need modern education. So that is no longer a bigger problem कि हम उनको परसुएट करें कि भाई तुम्हें मॉडर्न एजुकेशन लेना है। बस ये है कि कॉलेज को कंट्रोल करके पॉलिटिकल स्टेचर बढ़ाने का एस्पिरेशन सब में था, मोहसिनुल मुल्क में बहुत ज्यादा था। उसके लिए वो काफी कुछ करना चाह रहे थे, लेकिन ओवरऑल जो कॉलोनियल स्टेट फंक्शनिंग का सिनेरियो बदल रहा था, तो ये जैसे ही उर्दू डिफेंस एसोसिएशन वगैरह बना के कुछ ज्यादा, मतलब उसको इनफॉर्मल लैंग्वेज में बोलें, जब ज्यादा उछलकूद करने की इन्होंने कोशिश की, तो इनको मैकडोनल्ड ने सबड्यू कर दिया कि नहीं, अब ज्यादा नहीं उछल सकते, क्योंकि अब हमें दूसरी तरफ देखना है, हमें नागरी की तरफ जाना है। तो वो नागरी मूवमेंट के प्रोटेगोनिस्ट को, राजा शिव प्रसाद या उन लोगों को अब ये ज्यादा वेटेज मिलने लगा। इनको कहा गया कि अब आप ठंडे पड़ो, ज्यादा उछलकूद नहीं करो। तो वो उसी में और वो मोहसिनुल मुल्क बाय टेम्परामेंट कुड नॉट अफोर्ड, he did not have the temperament to confront, he did not have that much of confidence, तो वो अपना सीधे सीधे सबड्यूड हो गए। बस इसमें अच्छी बात ये थी कि ये जितने सारे लोग, उनके जो मेजर कंपेनियंस का हमने नाम लिया, इनका कोई फिनेंशियल मोटिव उस तरह का सेल्फ परपिचुएशन का नहीं था। ऐसा कोई एविडेंस नहीं मिलता है, कोई सजेस्टिव एविडेंस भी ऐसा नहीं मिलता है। कॉलेज में सब अपनी अपनी चलाना चाहते थे। जैसा कि हमने कहा कि वकारुल मुल्क का विजन बिल्कुल अलग था, सर सैयद वाला विजन ही नहीं था मॉडर्न एजुकेशन का, लेकिन साथ में उस पर्सन के अंदर भी उनकी पर्सनालिटी के कई शेड्स हैं। जैसे वो इतने ट्रेडिशनलिस्ट या रिएक्शनरी थे एजुकेशन और दूसरे मामलों में, ह्यूमन एजुकेशन के मामलों में और ज्यादा वो कंजर्वेटिव थे, लेकिन बहुत ज्यादा वो ह्यूमनिस्ट भी थे। इस पर एक ब्लॉग भी है नवेद मसूद साहब का, छोटा सा ब्लॉग है, ये जो बेकारुल मुल्क हैं, इनके बेटा इंग्लैंड गए पढ़ने और वहीं एक अंग्रेज मिस चार्ली से इन्होंने शीली से शादी कर ली। इनको कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं थी, इन्होंने काफी अच्छा रिसेप्शन दिया, फेलिसिटेशन दिया। बाद में उनके बेटे की मौत हो गई, उनकी पोती की भी मौत हो गई, और ये अपने बहू को पूरी तरह से जो भी उनका खर्च हो सकता था इनके इकोनॉमिक कैपेसिटी के हिसाब से वो कैरी ऑन कर रहे थे। बाद में उनकी बहू इंग्लैंड वापस चली गई और वहां वो मुकदमा लड़के उनको अपने विरासत में हिस्सा मिल गया, तो वो उनको खासी अच्छी जायदाद मिल गई। तो उन्होंने खत लिखा कि हमें अब यहाँ मिल गया है, इसलिए अब आप बहुत परेशानी उठाकर हमारे लिए हमारा खर्च मत भेजिए, वो तकलीफ ना उठाइए। उनकी बहू ने उन्हें खत लिखा। तब इन्होंने अपनी बहू को लिखा कि नाउ व्हेन यू आर सो वेल सेटल्ड, I would suggest you that you should go for another marriage, and I will have very good relationship with the family you will go into, you will marry yourself into, and you must marry. फिर उन्होंने, वो बहू ने खत लिखा है अपने फादर बेकारुल मुल्क को कि सो वेरी नाइस ऑफ यू, और वो बेकारुल मुल्क क्लियर करते हैं, एक्सप्लेन करते हैं कि हमने अब तक ये बात इसलिए नहीं उठाई कि तुम शादी कर लो कि तुम्हें ये न लगे कि तुम मुझ पर बोझ हो, इसलिए मैं ये सवाल तब तक नहीं उठाया, अब तुम जाओ शादी कर लो। तो उन्होंने कहा कि नहीं, मैं अपने उसी डिसीज्ड हस्बैंड के ही इसमें याद में हम अपनी जिंदगी गुजारेंगे, आई एम नॉट गोइंग टू गो फॉर मैरिज। और वो जो करस्पॉन्डेंस, एक्सचेंज ऑफ करस्पॉन्डेंस है दोनों के बीच, फादर इन लॉ एंड डॉटर इन लॉ, बहू जो भी कहें, शिली और बेकारुल मुल्क के बीच में, अब वो करस्पॉन्डेंस पढ़ने से लगेगा कि भाई ये तो बहुत बड़ा ह्यूमनिस्ट था, बहुत अच्छे खासे मॉडर्निस्ट, इतने मॉडर्न नहीं हो सकते थे। तो एक पर्सनालिटी में कई तरह के स्ट्रेंथ्स थे, और इन सब में इनके एजुकेशन का विजन, रिफॉर्मिज्म का विजन, कॉलेज को कंट्रोल करने के पावर का जो खेल है उसमें वो सेंटर ऑफ पावर खुद बनना चाहते हैं, वो सारे एम्बिशन अपनी जगह। लेकिन ये जितने कॉम्पेनियंस थे, इनके कोई फाइनेंशियल मोटिव नहीं थे कि बस हम ही सेल्फ परपिचुएट करेंगे, या उस तरह का नहीं था। दैट मे हैव बीन वन ऑफ द इंपॉर्टेंट रीजंस हाउ द होल टीम टुक द मिशन फॉरवर्ड। और कोई इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन हो जो बताया जाए?
क्वेश्चंस तो काफी हैं। मैंने जैनब नकवी का क्वेश्चन लिया है क्योंकि आपने हाली का जिक्र किया, तो उन्होंने बोला, आई वांटेड टू आस्क इफ मौलाना अल्ताफ हाली कैन आल्सो बी कंसिडर्ड वन ऑफ हिज कॉमरेड्स as it is known from the letter of Sir Syed dated 1879 that it was him who made Hali write the famous मुसद्दस। ये आपने आप इसके बारे में मुसद्दस हाली which Hali laments the moral death of the community. Is it true that Maulana Hali gave the copyright of the book to the college for funds despite being short of money himself?
ये फंड वाला एस्पेक्ट पे तो आई एम नॉट वेरी श्योर, लेकिन हाली का जो एस्पेक्ट है उसमें हमने एक लॉन्ग कॉलम भी लिखा है। हमारे लिए इंट्रिगिंग रहा कि ये जो कंपेनियंस का या कॉलेज के पावर प्ले का जो पूरा चल रहा था टसल इन द लास्ट डिकेड ऑफ सर सैयद, उसमें हाली कहीं फिगर नहीं करते हैं, वेयर एज हाली वाज वेरी क्लोज एड ऑफ सर सैयद, और सर सैयद ने उनसे काफी ये कराया था। हाली के बारे में कुछ बातें और बता दूं, जिनको हाली वाला एस्पेक्ट जानना है वो एक किताब जरूर पढ़ें, हाली का सियासी शऊर, मोइन हसन जज्बी की वो पीएचडी थीसिस है, वो किताब छप गई है, कई एडिशन उसकी छपी है, पॉपुलर किताब रही है, वो पढ़ें। रेख्ता पर मिल जाएगा। हाली की एक नज्म है मुतवस्सत तबका, उसमें मुतवस्सत तबका को प्रोज में, उस नज्म के फुटनोट में फर्स्ट पेज में उन्होंने प्रोज में एक छोटे से पैराग्राफ में उन्होंने समझाया है। हमने उसका स्क्रीनशॉट अपने ट्विटर वगैरह पे भी शेयर किया था, फेसबुक पर भी। उसमें उन्होंने पूरा एक्सप्लेन किया है कि व्हाट डिड ही मीन बाय द मिडिल क्लास, मुतवस्सत तबका, जिसमें उन्होंने कहा कि अपर क्लास जो है, एरिस्टोक्रेटिक क्लास, वो बिल्कुल डिजेनरेट हो गया हुआ है और वो अपने ही कंस्पिकुअस कंजम्पशन में वो मोरली डिजेनरेट हो गया हुआ, उसको कोई फिक्र नहीं है दुनिया की। और जो बिल्कुल लोअर क्लास है, अदना तबका, वो यूज करते हैं वर्ड, उसको भी बहुत वो डिराइसिवली देख रहे हैं कि इनके अंदर वो अर्ज ही नहीं है खुद को ग्रो कराने का, डेवलप कराने का। तो ये थोड़ा सा रिएक्शनरी, थोड़ा नहीं काफी रिएक्शनरी बात है। लेकिन मिडिल क्लास के बारे में बोल रहे हैं कि ये वो लोग हैं जो एजुकेशन और दूसरे तरह के जो स्किल्स मॉडर्निटी ने जो ऑफर किए हैं, वो सारे स्किल्स को एक्वायर करके दे हैव एन अर्ज टू गो अहेड, टू मूव अहेड। तो इसी पे ओवरऑल जो है देश, मुल्क का और कौम का के बेटर फ्यूचर का इन्हिसार है, डिपेंडेंस है। तो उसमें हाली सर सैयद से थोड़ा आगे इस मामले में भी थे कि वो अपने पानीपत में उन्होंने गर्ल्स कॉलेज भी कायम कर लिया था 1894 या 95 में। तो इन मेनी वेज हाली वाज अहेड। लेकिन ये जो पावर प्ले था कॉलेज मैनेजमेंट का, उसमें हाली क्यों नहीं देखते हैं, ये इंट्रीगिंग है मेरे लिए। और ये क्वेश्चन ठीक से प्रोब करने की जरूरत है कि उस पावर प्ले में वो कहाँ थे, सर सैयद के इतना करीब हो के भी। सर्टेन इश्यूज में हाली ने हार्श आर्टिकल्स लिखे हैं उन अफेयर्स के सर्टेन एपिसोड्स पर। लेकिन जब वो हयाते जावेद में उस एपिसोड को लिख रहे हैं सर सैयद की बायोग्राफी में, तो उसको वो थोड़ा टोन डाउन कर रहे हैं, डाइल्यूट कर रहे हैं अपने उस हार्शनेस को। इसकी बहुत सारी वजहें होंगी जिसको बहुत बारीकी से उस पर देखने की जरूरत है। वी नीड टू लुक इनटू इट, एंड मोर ऑफ द प्रोफेशनल हिस्टोरियंस नीड टू लुक इनटू इट, all these aspects, all these documents, which would hopefully help us comprehend the issue more clearly.
जी सर। नजमुल जी बोल रहे हैं कि it is well known that Sir Syed's main associates like Mohsin ul-Mulk, Waqar ul-Mulk did not share his religious ideas. Still, they associated with him in establishing and running the MAO college. ठीक है, wasn't it because the college was a political institution right from its inception? आपने इसके बारे में थोड़ा हिंट दिया है, maybe you can elaborate.
फ्रांसिस रॉबिन्सन और लेलीवेल्ड साफ साफ इसको कह रहे हैं कि देखिए ये पॉलिटिकल इंटरप्राइज था। और उसको इफ्तिखार आलम साहब बहुत क्लियरली कह दे रहे हैं कि अलीगढ़, बुलंदशहर और मुरादाबाद के मुस्लिम जो लैंडेड एलिट्स थे, उनका ये एक पॉलिटिकल प्रोजेक्ट था। जो कैंपेन टू अपग्रेड द कॉलेज इनटू यूनिवर्सिटी था 1898 से 1920, उसमें क्लियर लिखा हुआ है कि दिस वाज एन एंटरप्राइज टू विन, क्रिएट एन ऑल इंडिया पॉलिटिकल कंस्टिट्यूएंसी ऑफ मुस्लिम्स एंड टू विन लीडरशिप। तो ये तो पूरा, जैसा कि हमने अपने प्रेजेंटेशन में भी कहा कि मोहसिन उल-मुल्क तो बहुत क्लियरली उनका पॉलिटिकल एजेंडा थे, पॉलिटिकल एजेंडा सबका था, और ये सर सैयद समझ भी रहे थे। सर सैयद ने एक दो स्पीच में कहा भी है, स्पीच का वो सिग्निफिकेंट एस्पेक्ट ये मोहम्मदन कॉलेज हिस्ट्री में भी वो उसको रखा गया है। सर सैयद कई तरीके से उन्होंने कहा, वो शेर गिदर, ये तमाम तरह का जो खेल था, और उसमें वो कह भी रहे थे कि अब कॉलेज चल पड़ा है तो इसको तो कंट्रोल करना हर कोई चाहेगा, क्योंकि उसके थ्रू वो कॉलोनियल स्टेट के हाईएस्ट ऑफिशियल इंक्लूडिंग वाइस रॉय, उनसे एक्सेसिबिलिटी मिल रही थी। तो ये पॉलिटिकल इंटरप्राइज तो था, क्लियरली था। जो बेटर इन्फॉर्म्ड स्कॉलर्स हैं ऑन दिस सब्जेक्ट, वो तो बहुत क्लियरली इसको कह रहे हैं। जिनको इस ओपिनियन से डिसएग्री करना है, उनके पास इस तरह के एविडेंस कम है या नहीं है, एडिक्वेट नहीं है या एडिक्वेटली क्लिंचिंग नहीं है। तो इसलिए तब तक तो हमें ये कहना ही पड़ेगा कि हाँ, ये जब तक कुछ नए एविडेंस वैसे ना मिल जाए कॉन्ट्री टू दैट, ये पॉलिटिकल इंटरप्राइज ही था, कल भी और आज भी। वरना एजुकेशन का जहां तक सवाल है, सिर्फ रिलीजियस व्यू ही नहीं, उनके एजुकेशन के व्यू से भी ना तो वकार उल-मुल्क एग्री कर रहे थे, मोहसिन उल-मुल्क तो बहुत क्लियर नहीं, तो बहुत चालाक आदमी थे, तो वो अपना पत्ता खोलते नहीं थे, खोले नहीं। लेकिन मौलवी समीउल्लाह और वकार उल-मुल्क तो क्लियरली उनके एजुकेशन के विजन को भी सब्सक्राइब नहीं करते थे। लेकिन एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशन की हेडशिप, लीडरशिप वो लेना चाह रहे थे, वो लिया, और उसमें तरह तरह का खेल हुआ। उसमें मोहसिन उल-मुल्क बहुत ज्यादा चालाक निकले। इतना ही नहीं, बल्कि इसमें मैं दो बात और ऐड करना चाहूंगा। नवाब रामपुर थे, नवाब भोपाल थे, वो एमएओ कॉलेज को तो चंदे देके देना चाहते थे, देते थे। अपनी अपनी रियासतों में वो कॉलेज नहीं खोल रहे थे, रेजिडेंशियल कॉलेज या नॉन रेजिडेंशियल कुछ भी नहीं खोल रहे थे। भोपाल में 1930-20 के बाद खुला, रामपुर में खुला ही नहीं। तो इससे भी समझ में आता है कि ये क्या है। बल्कि नवाब रामपुर को इन्होंने मैनिपुलेट करके, एक वक्त ऐसा आया था जब उनसे 50,000 रुपया वकारुल मुल्क ने नवाब से मांगा, लेकिन शर्त ये रखवाया कि ये जिसको चाहे ट्रस्ट बोर्ड ऑफ ट्रस्टी से हटाएं, और सेक्रेटरी को और प्रिंसिपल को जिसको भी हटाना चाहें। वो उसकी एक लंबी कहानी जो इफ्तिखार साहब बहुत वजाहत से उसको बताते हैं। उस खेल में मोहसिनुल मुल्क खुद वकारुल मुल्क को ऐसा इस्तेमाल किया कि बाद में मोहसिनुल मुल्क की सेक्रेटरी रह गए, और वकारुल मुल्क को बहुत इंतजार करना पड़ा सेक्रेटरी बनने के लिए। तो मोहसिनुल मुल्क बहुत चालाकी से खेल खेलते थे।
सर किदवाई साहब का कमेंट आपके सामने है। उन्होंने बोला है perceptive talk, but I'm afraid Gunetar is not right in asserting that Syed Mohammad Mahmud himself got isolated from anti-Congress propaganda. In at least twice, he wrote two hard-hitting articles against the Congress in the Aligarh Institute Gazette.
That I'm thankful for this pertinent information, particularly the direct evidence of his write-up in the Aligarh Institute Gazette. So I think Guenther's this suggestive articulation by Guenther needs to be critiqued in the light of the evidence Shafi sir is letting us know. So on that count, Guenther stands corrected, and therefore we need to cite Guenther on this count, taking this evidence suggested by Shafi sir, taking that evidence into account. We need to engage with that aspect accordingly.
Just want you all to know that we also had a talk with
क्या हो गया भाई?
I apologize for this disruption. Completely unprecedented. Electricity chali gayi, which is quite a rare occurrence. But it's been raining quite hard, and there's a storm here. So sorry about this. So as we were discussing, so we had this talk by Kadwai Saab, and he enlightened us on, and we revisited Sir Syed Ahmed Khan based on his book. Okay, so I think I'm going to take two questions that have come up from Shivangini ma'am. How does the understanding of Sir Syed and Aligarh movement in the pioneering works of the generation of scholars like Leliweld, Mushirul Hassan, Troll, etc., differ from the recent works on the subject by scholars like Iftikhar Alam Khan, Shafiq Idwai, etc., and in terms of their conceptual approaches. So, what is the difference between the between the earlier scholars and the scholars now who are revisiting?
You see, Lely is a kind of work where in so many footnotes or endnotes, that is in footnote style, we find insights about the research gaps that which should be undertaken. So far as comparison between the work by Lely and the recent works is concerned, there are many writings and speeches of Sir Syed which have not been taken into account by those scholars for certain reasons. For example, the issue of women education is concerned. Shafiq Idwai's work, in terms of conclusion, he may not be arriving at a different conclusion, but so far as the melodramatic episode of the Maulvi Mumtaz is concerned, in the very same issue, Hafiz Jalandhari number or whatever the detail is there, in that very Urdu magazine, from where Gail Minow took this episode and popularized it, in that very magazine, when one goes further into it, one finds that the episode narrated by Gail Minow and popularized by her is not truthful. That was not the kind of melodrama that happened. Bilkul, you will tear the manuscript will be torn apart into pieces and then it will be pieced together. So that episode is factually wrong, and that the episode is factually wrong comes out from the very source which Gail Minow looked into. So these are minor things. Other important thing is that in the last 7 years of Sir Syed's speeches, which have been compiled by Maulvi Mohammad Imamuddin Gujarati, Majmoo'e lectures by speeches. Once one goes into the last 7 or 8 years of speeches of Sir Syed, one finds that Sir Syed was very conscious of the fact that he is being subjected to criticism for his views pertaining to women education. Sir Syed is trying to explain, he is trying to defend himself. You may find that argument not defensible from the contemporary perspective. You may not be accepting those explanations offered by Sir Syed, but he is trying to explain. And once you look into those writings, it clearly comes out that Sir Syed may not be taken as a modernist with regard to the women education, but he was not as big a villain as he has been made out to be once the scholars take into account his defense and explanations. So these are certain minor things, minor or important, depends upon a scholar, but these are the things which are being brought out by the people. Similarly, so far as these factional fights within the college management is concerned, Lillyweld has dropped hints. He has given some anecdotes as well. Things have not come out in greater detail for whatever reason. Otherwise, the value, the significance, the utility, the importance of the work of Lillyweld can't ever be denied. That has to remain a most important work on the subject. Every other researcher derives much from there. As I told you, that the research gaps have also been suggested by Lilywell. So it is extremely useful work, but taking lead from there, you can still find so many things into the primary sources.
There is yet another question by Shivangi ma'am. We're going to take that up. And there are several questions, sir, but I don't think we have the time to go through all these questions. In the meantime, here is the second question. Also, do you think that the renewed interest in Sir Syed and the Aligarh movement, for instance, scholars like Lawrence Gautier, etc., have been writing on Sir Syed, AMU, etc., do you think that this has anything to do with the contemporary political developments in India in terms of the question of intensification of the religious conflicts, targeting of educational institutions by the government regimes in power?
Uh, all history is contemporary history, so we look into past through the present prism. So that goes without saying that contemporary contentions invite you to or persuade you to look into those things. Lawrence Gautier has been coming out. I've seen her 2-3 essays. In fact, I have also given summary of her essays in Urdu on and have shared it on Facebook. So Lawrence Gautier has got many new evidence to say something new, particularly how the MU adjusted itself in post-partition era. And on that count, even though a very influential research has been published by Violet Graf in EPW in August 1990. Despite that significant research, Lawrence Gautier has been able to say quite new things, but that has to do with post-partition era. On Sir Syed also, she has said some new things in one of the essays which is available on academia. We are waiting for her book to be published, and then we will find how many new things she offers us to read. But her essays do suggest that she does have a huge promise.
So
This
there's
contemporary
one. Sorry.
yes.
No, sir.
So
Please
far
go
as
ahead.
this contemporary issue is concerned, you see, there are many historical burdens on MU to be explained by the MU people. So sometimes Raja Man Pratap controversy comes, sometimes Jinnah portrait controversy comes, and all the time one has to answer all these questions. And perhaps no other university carries this burden. The kind of era we are living in, not as many times BHU has been burdened to explain why its founder was in an organization like Hindu Mahasabha, but MU has to carry this burden of explaining. I think I need not elaborate more upon that.
Sure, sir. So there's one question by Professor Rizavi, and hope all is well, sir. Was Syed Mahmud's different religious beliefs lead to Mohsin-ul Mulk and others to oppose him?
Whatever I have been able to read and understand through those limited readings, I think religious belief had hardly any bearing. The bearing was about, as I told, as we underlined in the beginning of the talk itself, that apparently this was personality clash, but substantively it was an ideological clash as to what was the vision of the college or the university. Syed Mahmud, as early as in 1872, he had already spelled out the whole scheme, Darul Ulum scheme that is called. So his scheme was of a university, and he had all kinds of views, very clarity of the views. those things were not clearly subscribed by these people. So far as Mohsinul Mulk is concerned, as I told you, he was clever enough. He never made it clear as to, compared to Bakarul Mulk and Samiullah, as to whether he stood for traditional education or modern Western education. My limited reading suggests that he never made it clear and purposefully did not do so, if I may say so. The conflict was political, that is, by virtue of controlling, leading the college management, he will have access to the powers that be. Perhaps Mohsinul Mulk had this kind of thing, but we need to explore more on that count. With the limited reading, one can safely say that the issue did not have to do with religious or sectarian aspect was not there, certainly not there.
So in conclusion, there's one last question, and this is quite a heavy question. So Professor Syed Ali Kazim's question: you have comprehensively read Sir Syed's writings. I wanted to know what was his reflection on some of his great contemporaries on the global stage. For instance, you have Sheikh Badiuzzaman Nursi, Afghani, Nemik Kemal of Turkey, and then Sheikh Mohammad Abdus of Egypt. They all were a happy blend of modernism and reformism. Just for my knowledge sake, I'm asking you, sir.
On this count, Shafiq Kidwai sir is more competent to answer. He has looked into those things more deeply. But what I have superficially come across, that most of the people of his age were discussed about, at least in his Aligarh Institute Gazette. Only omission is Ghalib's obituary. Otherwise, everybody who every important person who passed away during that era, obituary of that person did appear in Aligarh Institute Gazette. Long obituaries, short obituaries. There were many writers of that era whose writings were summarized by Sir Syed in Aligarh Institute Gazette. Unfortunately, some of the tall scholars take those summaries to have been authored by Sir Syed himself, and these factual inaccuracies have been pointed out by Shafiq Kidwai so many times, including in his book Sawane Sir Syed Ek Bazdid, and in his latest book From Routledge as well. So I won't be able to say much specifically as to which of the names Dr. Kazim have mentioned here have been discussed about by Sir Syed in his Aligarh Institute Gazette or in his speeches. But as any intellectual or intelligentsia is supposed to have his antenna open and to be receptive and to be reflective about, Sir Syed did write something or the other on all those persons or activists of that day from many parts of the world. इजिप्ट में सिस्टम ऑफ एजुकेशन क्या है, इंडिया में कैसा है, इस तरह का भी ऐसे है. और ये पर्सनालिटीज पे तो खूब है, उनकी राइटिंग पे, उन पर मतलब सिर्फ ओबिचुअरी ही नहीं और भी दूसरी तरह की चीजें भी लिखी गई हैं. खुद सर सैयद इंग्लैंड में थे और वो डार्विन के ओरिजिन ऑफ स्पीसीज वगैरह पे भी क्या क्या उन्होंने डिस्कशन में हिस्सा लिया. फिर उनकी राइटिंग भी यहाँ अलीगढ़ में पड़ी हुई है और मुझे लगता है कि those writings have not been used by the scholars कि वो डार्विन के उस पे क्या करना. बल्कि डार्विन के इशू पे अच्छा याद आया कि समीउल्ला जो है मजाक उड़ाते हैं सर सैयद का कि बताइए डार्विन पे सर सैयद बात कर रहे हैं. डार्विन कहता है आदमी जो है बंदर से आदमी बना है, बताइए ये कितनी मजाक खेज बात है. इस तरह का बहुत वो सरकास्टिकली वो लिख रहे हैं और उसको पढ़ने में थोड़ी हंसी भी आती है, उसमें तंज भी है, मजाक भी है. और उसमें समीउल्लाह साहब की भी जो उनका भी जो एंटी मॉडर्निस्ट पर्सनालिटी कंटेंट है वो वहां भी रिफ्लेक्ट हो रहा है। तो है हो सकता है इसमें से कोई स्पेसिफिक पर्सन पे, कोई एक दो पे ना बोले हो, लेकिन अफगानी पे तो उनका खूब था, सीधा उनका अफगानी से तो पैन इस्लामिज्म पे उनका सीधा डायरेक्ट डिसएग्रीमेंट था। ही वाज एब्सोल्युटली अगेंस्ट पैन इस्लामिज्म, इसीलिए वो उम्मा की बात नहीं करते थे सर सैयद, वो कौम की बात करते थे, वो इंडियननेस की बात करते थे, वो पैन इस्लामिज्म को रिजेक्ट करते थे। बाद में 20th सेंचुरी में बहुत इस तरह का हुआ है। खुद सैयद महमूद पे, मतलब सर सैयद के बेटा नहीं, जो नेहरू के कैबिनेट में जो मिनिस्टर हुए, उस सैयद महमूद पे काफी दिन तक शक था कि ये पैन इस्लामिस्ट तो नहीं है। ये खैरी ब्रदर्स, जिनको रेड हॉट नाजी कहा जाता था, तो इस पे हमने जिक्र किया कि माजिद हयात सिद्दीकी का 1987 का ISHR का लॉन्ग एसे है, उसमें ये जो जब्बार खैरी और सत्तार खैरी थे, तो ये तो पैन इस्लामिस्ट हैं या नहीं, इसी पर इंडियन इंटेलिजेंस और जर्मन इंटेलिजेंस और इंग्लैंड इंटेलिजेंस का कितना सारा फाइल वाइल है, उसको माजिद हयात सिद्दीकी ने पूरा यूज किया है। गवर्नमेंट हंट कर रही है 3-4 कंट्री की गवर्नमेंट कि भाई ये पैन इस्लामिस्ट है या नहीं, पता करो। उसी तरह के डॉक्यूमेंट में, इंटेलिजेंस के डॉक्यूमेंट में, उनको एक जगह रेड हॉट नाजी भी कहा गया है, वही खैरी ब्रदर्स को। तो इसलिए ये कहना कि किसी, हो सकता है कोई स्पेसिफिक पर्सन ओमिट हो गया, जैसे गालिब से सर सैयद तकरीज तक लिखवा लिए थे, शायद उस तकरीज से उनको तकलीफ भी थी, ऐसी बात गालिब ने 38 अशार पे मुश्तमिल नज्म लिख दी थी। लेकिन उतनी कुर्बत के बावजूद गालिब का ओबिचुअरी अलीगढ़ इंस्टीट्यूट गैजेट में शायद नहीं। तो उस तरह का कोई ओमिशन हो तो, अदरवाइज इसेंशियल टर्म्स में सर सैयद डिड स्पीक एंड राइट ऑन ऑल इम्पोर्टेंट पीपुल एंड ऑल इम्पोर्टेंट इवेंट्स ऑफ द डे। ये अलीगढ़ इंस्टीट्यूट गैजेट में काफी कुछ रखा, बल्कि शाफे साहब का हमने पर्सनल नोट भी जो रिसर्च के दौरान उन्होंने लिया है, हमने वो नोट भी देखा है। उसमें उन्होंने काफी कैटेगराइज किया हुआ है कि किस तरह के सब्जेक्ट पे कितने एडिटोरियल्स या कमेंट्रीज या ट्रांसलेशन सर सैयद ने लिखे हैं, उसका पूरा उन्होंने रजिस्टर बनाया हुआ है। हमने उनसे रिक्वेस्ट किया है कि इस पूरे को डिजिटाइज कर दीजिए और PDF बना कर रख लीजिए, वरना ये तो उससे जो है वो उसकी लॉन्गेविटी एक्सेसिबल भी हो जाएगा ज्यादा। तो ये है
सर। मैं काफ़ी देर से सोच रही हूँ और आपने एक 360 डिग्री व्यू बना दिया है और काफ़ी इंसाइट्स मिले मुझे आज सर सैयद पे। मैं एक चीज़ पूछना चाहती हूँ, आपके हिसाब से, आप जितना जानते हैं, जितना आपने पढ़ा है, वो किस किस्म के फादर थे, और वो किस किस्म के, मतलब एज अ, हम ह्यूमन बीइंग की बात कर रहे हैं, उनके फ्रेंड्स की बात कर रहे हैं, उनके विजन की बात कर रहे हैं, बट व्हाट वाज ही लाइक एज अ फादर?
देखिए, ये इफ्तिखार आलम साहब की जो किताब है सर सैयद दरूने खाना, उसमें सर सैयद के इन एस्पेक्ट्स पर खूब अच्छे से लिखा गया है, और यही वो किताब है जो जिसका अंग्रेजी तर्जुमा हो रहा है। तो हम लोग वी जस्ट होप एंड प्रे के एज सुन एज पॉसिबल उसका इंग्लिश रेंडरिंग आ जाए। उसमें ये सारे एस्पेक्ट्स हैं। ही वाज ए मैन ऑफ हिज फैमिली। ऐसा नहीं था कि वो जब जमाने का दर्द लिए घूम रहे थे तो वो अपनी फैमिली पे नहीं ध्यान दे रहे थे। वो इंग्लैंड थे तब उनकी बच्ची का इंतकाल हो गया, बहुत तड़पे हैं, बहुत दर्द में। बेटा उनका जो बड़ा लड़का था वो नौकरी से डिसमिस, पुलिस में थे सैयद हामिद, वो डिसमिस हो गए सर्विस से। बेटे को शिकायत भी थी कि भैया वाइसराय तक से आपके ताल्लुकात हैं, ग्लव्स कह देंगे तो नौकरी बच जाएगी, नहीं किए तो कोई शिकायत भी रही होगी। बेटे के मरने के बाद वो दिल्ली से ही उन्होंने अपना मुंह मोड़ लिया। बेटे के इंतकाल के बाद दिल्ली शायद एक आध बार ही गए, दिल्ली पूरी तरह छोड़ दी, इतना उनको दर्द हुआ। फिर उस बेटे की जो विडो थी, बहू उनकी, उनके लिए वो काफी इंतजाम किए हैं। बहुत सारे खतूत और हैं जिसमें पता चलता है कि वो कितना पैसा कब भेज रहे हैं, इस तरह से। तो वो उन सब के लिए फिक्रमंद है, माँ के लिए, बेटे के लिए, बहू के लिए। बाद और बल्कि ये भी, ये वाकया भी याद रहना चाहिए कि सर सैयद की एक बहू तो बेवा हो ही गई, जो सैयद महमूद और उनकी बेगम में बाद में बहुत ज्यादा वो नहीं था। तो इनों की हालत, माली हालत जाती तौर से ऐसी हो गई थी कि उन सैयद महमूद की जो बेगम थी वो उन्होंने एप्लीकेशन लिखा और फॉरवर्ड कराया किसी कॉलेज के ही किसी यूरोपियन स्टाफ से, जिसमें वो कह रहे हैं कि सर सैयद को जो पेंशन मिल रहा था उस पेंशन को जारी रखिए, तभी हम रॉस मसूद को पढ़ा पाएंगे। तो वो रिक्वेस्ट उनका जो है सुना गया और उसी वजीफे से रॉस मसूद फिर इंग्लैंड जाकर पढ़े। उसमें कई जो अंग्रेज दोस्त थे उनके उन्होंने मदद किया। तो ये एक सबक भी हासिल होना चाहिए कि जो कई एकड़ का कॉलेज खड़ा कर दिया, यूनिवर्सिटी बना दिया, उसके घर में कुछ वैसा नहीं था। उनको इसी तरह से वजीफों के लिए रिक्वेस्ट करके तब वो अपने रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी वो गुजार पा रहे थे। तो नहीं तो अभी तो लोग काफी अमीर हो जाते हैं कई तरीकों से। तो ही वॉज ए मैन ऑफ फैमिली और इसको बहुत अच्छे से सर सैयद दरूने खाना में आया है। और उनका जो पर्सनल कमिटमेंट और जो पूरा लार्जर पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट में जो उनका कमिटमेंट था, उसको यूं भी देखिए कि उनका जो फर्स्ट बायोग्राफर है कर्नल ग्राहम, जो 1885 में ही बायोग्राफी लिख दिया था, तो कर्नल ग्राहम ने कहा कि भाई आप विडोवर हुए हो बहुत ऐसे एज में कि यू शुड गो फॉर अनदर मैरिज। तो वो हंसने लगे और इसको टालने के लिए उन्होंने कहा, इस बात को दूसरे तरह से रख दिया, मतलब न कहने का उनका अपना एक तरीका था कि मैं शादी करूंगा, दो शर्त है कि वो अंग्रेजनी हो और वो इतनी बूढ़ी हो कि पोपली हो, उसके दांत वांत कुछ ना हो। तो अपना एक जराफत के अंदाज में कह दिया। तो दैट वे उनको आप जो आप जानना चाह रहे हैं इतने बात से आप, मुझे लगता है कि आई हैव बीन एबल टू एक्सप्लेन इट व्हाट काइंड ऑफ पर्सन ही वाज। ही वाज ए मैन हु नेवर वांटेड टू लूज फ्रेंड्स। समीउल्लाह जो है वो खत में उनसे 17 साल छोटे थे, समीउल्लाह की हर तरह से मदद करते थे। समीउल्लाह खत में भी बदतमीजी कर देते थे, इनसे डिसरिस्पेक्टफुली बोलते थे, लेकिन सर सैयद उस तरह से रिएक्ट नहीं करते थे। बस एक दो खत में वो लिखे हैं बहुत रिग्रेटफुली कि मैं मौलवी समीउल्लाह को अपने दोस्तों में शुमार नहीं कर सकता। वो मोहसिनुल मुल्क को खत लिख रहे हैं और उनकी अपनी कुछ चीजें, लेकिन वो उनको ही इज टेकिंग हिम आल्सो अलोंग इन हिज प्रोजेक्ट डिस्पाइट ऑल सच डिफरेंसेस। तो उससे लगता है कि उनकी एक लीडरशिप क्वालिटी थी। ही न्यू हाउ टू टेक पीपल अलोंग हाउसएवर वाइडेस्ट पॉसिबल डिफरेंसेस कुड बी देयर। तो वो है राजा जयकिशन दास से भी उनकी दोस्ती इसी तरह की रही। उन्होंने उनको कहा कि आप जो है कुछ प्रिजुडिस दिखा रहे हैं, कम्यूनल प्रिजुडिस फेमिन रिलीफ डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन में। उन्होंने उसी वक्त सॉरी कह दिया, वो दोस्ती चली, हमेशा रही, इंड्योर की वो फ्रेंडशिप। तो दैट वे वो काफी इस तरह के वो थे। ही वाज मैन ऑफ फ्रेंड्स, मैन ऑफ फैमिली एंड मैन ऑफ पब्लिक कॉज।
सर, ये अली काजिम सर का एक क्वेश्चन है। इट इज ऑफन सेड दैट रिफॉर्मिज्म वाज टिपिकली द रिस्पांस ऑफ द उलेमा, more often than not supported by traditional mercantile elites, whereas modernism was typically the response of Muslim ruling elites. For many, these elites, in seeking Western material strength, ran the risk of throwing out the Islamic baby with bathwater. Sir Syed tried to reconcile with these two broad trends. Where do you place Sir Syed within these two broad categories? Rather, to which side he tilted more?
इसका बहुत कैटेगोरिकल रिस्पांस तो हम नहीं दे पाएंगे, लेकिन वो अनलाइक एक इसेंशियल इमेज है कि लैंडेड एरिस्टोक्रेसी जो है वो ट्रेडिंग क्लास को थोड़ा डिस्डेन या स्कॉर्नफुली देखते थे। सर सैयद क्या ऐसा नहीं मिलता है। वो तो आला तालीम वाले को भी कह रहे हैं कि तिजारत सीखो, तिजारत करना होगा, क्योंकि सभी को नौकरियां ही मिल जाए कॉलोनियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में जरूरी नहीं है, बहुत कम को ही मिल पाएगा। तो उसके लिए भी तुम्हें तालीम की जरूरत होगी। और उसमें जितना मॉडर्न कॉमर्स है, वो डिबेंचर और क्या क्या बहुत तरह की चीजें हैं, उन तमाम चीजों का जिक्र कर रहे हैं। उस पर उनके लॉन्ग एडिटोरियल्स हैं कि एजुकेशन किस तरह से हेल्पफुल होगा इन तमाम चीजों को, मतलब इन ऑर्डर टू कम टू टर्म्स विद दोस थिंग्स। सो ट्रेड को ही डिड नॉट लुक डाउन अपॉन। जहां तक कि चंदे का सवाल है, चंदा तो वो कॉलेज के लिए जहां मिल जाए, जैसे मिल जाए, वो उसमें तो तकरीर भी उस तरह की कर लेते थे कि किसी तरह चंदा आ जाए, जिसमें यू विल फाइंड इनकंसिस्टेंसी, और रिलीजियस रिफॉर्मिज्म में कॉम्प्रोमाइज करना या कास्ट वगैरह पे रिएक्शनरी बात कहना had also to do with his quest for fund. तो वो उस कोशिश में भी इस तरह के की बातें उनको बोलनी पड़ती थी, इस तरह के कुछ कुछ यानी उसको इफ यू अलाउ मी टू बी इनफॉर्मल, तो वो तरह तरह के ड्रामे नौटंकी करते थे कि भाई पैसे आ जाए कॉलेज में तो उसके लिए कुछ भी करेंगे। तो दैट वे अदरवाइज इनका जो जो प्रिसाइज क्वेरी है उसको पे कहना मुश्किल है। देखिए वो इंडस्ट्रियल और एग्रीकल्चरल एग्जीबिशन जो लगता था, अभी भी अलीगढ़ में लगता है, नुमाइश कहते हैं, बिजनौर में लगा, तो वो इस एनुअल इवेंट को पॉपुलराइज कराने में इनका बहुत बड़ा हाथ है। और वो बिजनौर वगैरह में वो तकरीरें भी उस तरह की किए हैं, एग्रीकल्चरल एंड इंडस्ट्रियल एग्जीबिशन यानी नुमाइश के इनॉग्रेशन में या उसके इवेंट में। तो उसमें ये ट्रेड पे था इनका काफी सारी राइटिंग, खासी राइटिंग है, कई राइटिंग है ट्रेड व्रेड को लेकर के, और एजुकेशन के थ्रू ट्रेड को कैसे प्रमोट कीजिएगा, इन सब पे उनका है ये। और एग्रेरियन प्रोडक्शन में एग्रीकल्चर को कमर्शियलाइज करने के लिए तो उन्होंने बहुत सारे प्रैक्टिकल स्टेप्स भी लिए अपार्ट फ्रॉम राइटिंग। तो है ये इस तरह का मिलता है, फर्दर और देखना पड़ेगा उनकी राइटिंग्स को, क्योंकि
सर
उनके
जरा
खतूत वगैरह में कम पड़े।
सर ये ही फॉलोइंग इट अप विद दिस वन मोर क्वेश्चन, ये पूछ रहे हैं कि it was in part because neither reformism nor modernism produced satisfactory answer to the problem of what was appropriate knowledge for Muslim society. ये खुद बता रहे हैं कि Islamist answer came to be proposed. Although it is an hypothetical question, but an interesting one to ask as to how Sir Syed would have reacted to Maududi Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb movement in the 20th century. ये हाइपोथेटिकल है, लेकिन आपके हिसाब से कैसा हो?
ये तो हिस्ट्री के डिसिप्लिन के बियॉन्ड है कि ऐसा हुआ, जो यूं होता तो क्या होता, ये अपना गालिब अपने शेर में कहेंगे। इसमें तो हिस्ट्री के स्टूडेंट के लिए तो कहना मुश्किल, लेकिन इतना कहा जा सकता है कि सर सैयद शायद इस्लामिस्ट ना होते, क्योंकि अगर इस्लामिस्ट होना होता तो वो तभी पैन इस्लामिस्ट हो गए होते और पैन इस्लामिज्म के खिलाफ नहीं खड़े होते। इसलिए मुझे नहीं लगता है कि वो उस तरह का, क्योंकि वो प्लुरैलिटी की बातें बहुत दूसरे तरह से किए हैं, और अगर इस्लामिस्ट होना होता तो फिर वो वहां भी ही रहते और वो लड़ते रहते, लड़के मर जाते, उसी में मारे जाते, कुछ होता। तो दैट वाज नॉट द केस। सर सैयद तो क्रिश्चियनिटी से और ब्रिटिश रूलर्स से, तो ही केम टू टर्म्स विथ इट। और दोनों में रिकॉन्सिलिएशन कैसे होगा क्रिश्चियनिटी में और इंडियन इस्लाम में, उसके लिए तो बहुत सारा उन्होंने सारे काम उसी तरफ किए उन्होंने। तो अगर इस्लामिस्ट होते तब तो वो फिर वो सीधे कन्फ्रंट करने वाले लोग थे, उसी में कट मार रहे थे। दारुल हर्ब, दारुल इस्लाम, सब सारी बहसें तो शाह वलीउल्लाह वगैरह खड़ी कर ही दिए थे, और एंसेस्ट्री के हिसाब से तो वो वहाबियत की तरफ रहते, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं है। तो उनको ये तामुल भी नहीं था। जब वो नौकरी करने चले तो मुगल स्टेट के बजाय उनको वहां भी ऑफर था, वहां भी एक्सेसिबिलिटी थी, मुगल दरबार में भी, और कंपनी ब्यूरोक्रेसी में भी थी। तो वो कंपनी के ब्यूरोक्रेट होना पसंद किए, यहाँ नहीं आए। अगर वो वैसे ही इस्लामिस्ट होते तो कहते कि नहीं, मैं तो इन ईसाइयों के इसमें नहीं जाऊंगा। तो वैसे कहा जा सकता है, लेकिन हिस्ट्री के स्टूडेंट को ऐसे मुझे नहीं लगता कि हिस्ट्री कैन गेट इनटू इट।
ठीक है सर, एग्जैक्टली 2 घंटे हो गए हैं और थैंक यू सो वेरी मच फॉर सच अ डिटेल्ड, और बहुत ही
Thank you.
ज़्यादा आपने हर एस्पेक्ट पे लाइट शेड करने की कोशिश की आज। और ऐसे तो हम लोग 2 सेशंस और कर सकते हैं, जिसमें आपने जैसे बोला कि बहुत किस्से और बहुत सारे एपिसोडिक इंसिडेंट्स हैं जो आप जिनके ऊपर आप बताना चाहेंगे, जिनके आप ऊपर आप प्रकाश डालना चाहेंगे। सो आई जस्ट वांट टू थैंक यू from the bottom of my heart. I have always been intrigued by Sir Syed. इनफैक्ट जो उन्होंने असारो सनादीद के ज़माने से, मुझे लगता है वो पर्सन कैसे थे, और एज अपोज टू वो पर्सन जो खत लिख रहे हैं, एंड यू नो ही इज गोइंग अराउंड आस्किंग फॉर यू नो फॉर सम सॉर्ट ऑफ ग्रांट्स, एंड सो वो पर्सनालिटी में कैसे बदलाव आया, कैसे वो पर्सन बदल गए. सो ऑल दीज क्वेश्चंस हैव ऑलवेज इंट्रीग्ड मी अबाउट हिज पर्सनालिटी. So I'm very thankful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And I also want to share with all of you that we will be here again next Saturday at 7 p.m. And that will be our last presentation in January. So stay tuned. We'll see you on Saturday at 7 p.m. I'm sorry. So we'll see you on the 29th of January at 7 p.m. Take care, everyone. And thank you so much, Professor Sajjad, for this lovely
Thank
introduction and a detailed talk. So thank you all. Good night. I want to particularly thank Professor Syed Ali Kazim for being there. And I want to thank everybody, Dr. Tabish Hashmi, Shivangni ma'am, and everyone, Shafi sir, who actually took time to come, and of course, Dr. Lakshmikant Mishra, who's always there. He supports us at all times, and you know, he's a constant. And of course, Najmul ji and everybody who has joined us, Zainab, um, Khwaja ji, and every person and who has joined us and it is very participatory. Have a very good evening, everyone. Take care of yourselves.
you.